What if I told you that 1,000 years ago, people knew how to beat the Arctic cold without electricity, gas, or any modern insulation? The northern winter in the Viking Age was not just a season. It was a time of year that tested everyone's survival skills. The sea froze over, the wind was strong enough to knock you off your feet, and the nights were so cold that one mistake could cost an entire family their lives. And yet these people did not just survive. They built houses that rivaled modern energy-efficient technologies in terms of efficiency. They did not know the chemistry of insulation materials, but they possessed something that has been lost in the 21st century, an intuitive understanding of nature and heat. Their dwellings were not crude huts, but carefully designed climatic machines, where every beam, every crack, and every layer had a functional purpose. Watch the video to the end to learn how ancient builders turned smoke into a blanket, why their houses really resembled upside-down ships, and what architectural tricks allowed them to survive Arctic nights without the slightest hint of modern technology.
I swear, the owl had him seeing things.
I can only imagine.
Want to know a secret that will change your perception of architecture? It is commonly believed that the ideal house should have right angles and straight walls, as we are used to seeing in modern cities. The Vikings thought completely differently, and their logic was dictated by the harsh necessity of survival in stormy winds. A straight wall takes on the full force of an icy gust, creating a high-pressure zone and quickly cooling the room. Northern craftsmen found a solution that allowed the wind to literally flow around the dwelling without taking away precious heat. Their famous longhouses often had a shape reminiscent of a ship, with convex walls slightly curved outward. This geometry, known today as the Trelleborg type, was an ingenious response to the challenges of the climate. The wind, hitting such a wall, did not encounter stiff resistance and glided smoothly along the surface. This reduced the load on the structure and prevented the appearance of drafts, which could be deadly. The streamlined shape allowed the house to maintain a stationary layer of air at the very surface of the wall, which served as an additional insulator. The roof also had a special shape, rising steeply and resembling the inverted bottom of a ship. This slope prevented snow from accumulating in critical amounts that could collapse the roof under its weight. However, the snow was not completely cleared away, as its layer served as an excellent natural insulator. The angle of inclination was calculated so that the snow cap lay evenly, covering the house like a warm blanket. It was a delicate balance between the strength of the structure and the use of the properties of precipitation. The length of such buildings could reach 30 meters or more, creating a single huge space inside. The greater the volume of air inside, the slower it cools when the outside temperature drops sharply. But simply building a large hall was not enough. It had to be correctly positioned on the terrain. The orientation of the house was always chosen taking into account the windrows of a particular valley or coast. The end walls, which had the smallest area, always faced the prevailing winds. Entrance doors were never located on the windward side, so that cold air would not rush inside every time they were opened. Most often, entrances were made on the sides, protecting them with additional extensions or canopies. These vestibules created a buffer zone where cold air mixed with warm air without penetrating directly into the living area. Every detail of the layout served one purpose: to preserve the internal microclimate. This was architecture born not of aesthetics, but of thousands of years of experience in battling the elements. The craftsmen of that era did not use drawings, but their eye for proportion and sense of scale were impeccable. The curvature of the walls was determined at the foundation marking stage, requiring complex calculations without measuring instruments. The support pillars were not placed in a straight line, but in a smooth arc, creating a power frame of incredible strength. This design could withstand not only hurricane-force winds, but also the weight of a mud roof soaked by rain. At the same time, the interior space remained free and spacious for the community to live in. Interestingly, this wall shape allowed heat from the hearth to be distributed more efficiently throughout the room. In a rectangular room, the corners often remain cold and damp, becoming a breeding ground for mold. In an oval house, air circulated freely, washing over the entire space and leaving no dead zones. Warm air currents rose, reflected off the sloping roof, and returned to the people. It was natural convection, working without fans or pumps. The layout of the houses in the settlement was also not random or chaotic. Buildings were often grouped together to shield each other from the wind, creating cozy courtyards. Larger structures protected smaller ones, forming a unified defensive perimeter against the cold. Passages were left between the houses so that they would not turn into wind tunnels. The entire settlement functioned as a single organism, resisting the harsh natural environment. We often underestimate the knowledge of the ancients, considering them primitive and crude compared to our technologies. But these people were able to feel nature in a way that we are no longer capable of. They did not fight the wind, but made it glide past without causing harm. Their houses stood for centuries, protecting generations of people in conditions where a modern cottage would freeze in an hour. It was a victory of reason and observation over the brute force of frost. We are very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this type of house? Could you live in a building without right angles? Write about it in the comments.
Did you hear the storm wolf howling?
He sounds cold.
Are you ready to learn the truth about the material that saved thousands of lives? The most important element of thermal protection in a Viking house was not the walls, but the unique roof. We are used to tiles or metal, but in that era, the best material was the earth itself. Roofs were covered with a thick layer of turf, layers of soil densely intertwined with grass roots. It was not just earth piled on top, but a complex, multi-layered technology. Laying a turf roof required special skill and knowledge of the properties of different soils. First, a solid floor of boards or poles was laid on strong wooden rafters. On top of it, several layers of birch bark were spread, which served as excellent waterproofing. Birch bark does not rot for decades and reliably protects the wood from moisture seeping through the soil. The bark sheets were laid overlapping, like fish scales, so that water could roll down without obstruction. Only then were heavy layers of turf, cut from meadows with thick grass, laid on top of the bark. They were laid grass side down in the first layer so that the roots would intertwine tightly with the bark and compact. The second layer was laid with the grass facing up, creating a living carpet that continued to grow. The roots of the plants held the soil together, preventing it from crumbling or being washed away by rain. Over time, such a roof became monolithic and incredibly durable. Turf has phenomenal thermal insulation properties that surpass many modern materials. The earth has enormous thermal inertia, heating up slowly and cooling down just as slowly. In summer, such a house was pleasantly cool, and in winter, it retained precious heat. A thick layer of soil dampened the noise of wind and rain, creating absolute silence inside. It felt like a reliable cave, but one created by human hands. The thickness of such a roof could reach 1/2 meter, creating a colossal load on the load-bearing walls. That is why the frame of a long house was built from massive logs, capable of withstanding tons of earth. The pillars supporting the roof were often solid trunks of century-old trees impregnated with resin. This weight was necessary. It pressed the log house to the ground, making it resistant to any storms. The house literally grew into the landscape, becoming part of the hill or plain. In winter, such a roof received an additional insulating layer in the form of snow cover. Snow, lingering on the grass and uneven turf, created an air cushion. The Vikings knew that clearing snow from the roof meant depriving the house of heat. They allowed snowdrifts to cover the dwelling, leaving only the smoke holes open. Inside, the temperature remained above freezing even in the most severe frosts. Caring for such a roof was an integral part of every household's life. The grass on the roof required attention. During a drought, it could dry out and become a fire hazard. Sometimes people even climbed onto the roof to fix pieces of turf that had slipped. In spring, the roof turned green earlier than the surrounding fields, as the heat from the house warmed the roots. It was a beautiful and practical solution dictated by nature itself. With proper care, a turf roof could last for several decades. When the birch bark began to age, the roof was reworked, replacing the waterproofing and laying new turf. It was a laborious process that involved the whole family or even neighbors. But the result was worth the effort. The house remained warm and dry in any climate. This technology is still used in Scandinavia and Iceland today. An earthen roof was not just a construction technique, but a symbol of man's connection to the earth. People literally lived under the protection of the soil that fed them and sheltered them from adversity. This created a special feeling of security and unity with the surrounding world. Inside, it smelled of wood, smoke, and slightly damp earth, the smell of reliability and peace. In addition to warmth, such a roof was practically impervious to fire from the outside. In times of frequent raids and wars, it was extremely difficult to set fire to a turf roof. Burning arrows simply went out in the damp grass and earth without causing any damage to the house. This gave the inhabitants an important advantage and a chance of escape in the event of an attack. Why do you think eco-friendly homes are returning to the idea of green roofs in our time? The secret I am about to reveal will change your understanding of ancient comfort. We are used to seeing huge fireplaces against the walls in movies, but the Vikings used a completely different heating system. The heart of a longhouse was the langeld, a long hearth located right in the center of the earthen floor. It was not just a pit for a fire, but a complex engineering structure designed to heat a huge space. The hearth stretched along the entire central axis of the living area, sometimes reaching several meters in length. This arrangement of the heat source was the only correct one from a physics point of view. The heat spread evenly in all directions, reaching the farthest corners of the room. If the hearth had been placed against a wall, half of the heat would have been lost to the street through the masonry. The central fire created a powerful upward flow of warm air, which formed the microclimate of the house. The entire life of the family revolved around this fiery core during the winter months. The hearth was usually lined with flat stones placed on their edges, creating the boundaries of the fire pit. These stones performed the vital function of heat accumulators, storing the energy of the fire. Even when the flames died down by morning, the heated stones continued to give off a soft, radiant heat. This allowed a comfortable temperature to be maintained without the need to constantly add wood. Special stones were selected that did not crack from temperature changes. Firewood for such a long hearth was also stacked in a special way so that it would burn long and evenly. Often whole trunks of small trees were used, which were gradually pushed into the fire as they burned. This was called a lazy fire, which could smolder for hours, giving off a lot of heat. This method saved energy on chopping wood and allowed the fire to burn all night. The wood was prepared in advance so that it had time to dry thoroughly. Kettles for cooking hung over the fire on long chains or tripods. Cooking was inextricably linked to heating. The heat used to cook soup also heated the house. The water in the kettles also acted as a heat accumulator and air humidifier. Moist air retains heat better than dry air, which was important on frosty days. The steam from the cauldrons mixed with the smoke, creating a special atmosphere inside. The floor around the hearth was carefully compacted with clay, creating a solid and fireproof surface. The earthen floor itself was a good insulator if it was dry and covered. Often, the area around the fire was sprinkled with fresh sand or covered with flat stones. This helped to keep it clean and reflected the heat back into the room. People walked here in soft shoes, feeling the warmth of the earth under their feet. The fire in a longhouse was never completely extinguished. It was considered the living soul of the dwelling. In the evening, the coals were carefully raked into a pile and covered with a layer of ash so that they would smolder until morning. In the morning, it was enough to fan them and throw in some wood chips to revive the flame. Losing the fire in winter was considered a bad omen and threatened to freeze the house. The keeper of the hearth was always a woman, the mistress of the house. The light from the long fire was the only illumination during the long polar nights. The flames cast bizarre shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of mystery and comfort. In this flickering light, sagas were told, conversations were held, and small tasks were performed. Fire brought people together, gathering them in a tight circle of warmth and safety. It was the center of the world for the people of the Viking Age. During particularly severe frosts, the amount of wood was increased, raising the flames higher. The heat radiation from the long hearth was so powerful that it was possible to stay indoors without outer clothing. People could sleep relatively far from the fire, feeling its breath on their skin. It was an effective system, proven by centuries of life in the north. Don't forget to like if you are impressed by the ingenuity of the people of the past. What the experts don't talk about may surprise you. The main problem with open fires indoors has always been smoke, which could suffocate sleepers. The Vikings did not have chimneys as we know them, with pipes and exhaust fans. Instead, they used the architecture of the roof and the physics of gases to create a safe environment. The smoke rose and accumulated under the high ridge of the roof, forming a dense layer. This layer of smoke was not an enemy, but served as an additional heat insulator, blocking the cold from the roof. The smoke filled the entire space under the triangular vault, but did not descend below a certain level. Architects precisely calculated the height of the walls and the slope of the roof so that the smoke line passed above human height. People lived, walked, and worked in clean air while a grey cloud hung over their heads. This required strict discipline and proper fire management. To allow smoke to escape, special openings called liugi were left at the highest point of the roof. These openings functioned as valves, releasing excess smoke, but retaining heat inside. They could be opened and closed with long poles directly from the floor. By adjusting the size of the opening, the inhabitants controlled the draft depending on the strength of the wind and frost. It was a manually controlled climate control system. The wooden roof structures, constantly exposed to smoke, were impregnated with resins and soot. This was an excellent preservation method, protecting the wood from rot and wood-boring beetles. The smoked beams became as hard as stone and lasted for centuries. Soot also covered the inside of the straw or turf, reducing the risk of fire from sparks. Smoke thus prolonged the life of the entire house. Of course, the smell of smoke permeated everything: clothes, hair, skin, and household items. But for the people of that era, it was the smell of warmth, home, and security, not burning. The eyes got used to the light haze, and the lungs adapted to the composition of the air. During strong storms, when the openings had to be closed almost completely, the smoke descended lower. Then people had to crouch down or sit on low benches. Along the ridge of the roof, they often made not just holes, but special boxes to protect against rain and snow. They were designed so that the wind, passing over them, created a vacuum and pulled the smoke out. This increased the draft, allowing the fire to burn brightly and without smoke. The craftsmen knew how to position these outlets so that the wind would not blow the smoke back into the house. Design errors made life in the house unbearable. There was also a system of side vents located on the gables of the building under the roof itself. They created through ventilation of the attic space, carrying away excess smoke. The airflows were organized so as not to affect the living area below. Cold, fresh air entered through gaps in the floor and doors, heated up, and rose along with the smoke. The circulation was constant and vital. In this smoke attic, food was often smoked and dried for the winter. Meat, fish, and cheese, hung from the beams, were slowly saturated with fragrant smoke and preserved. This allowed for the creation of food supplies that would not spoil for months. Smoke was not only warmth and protection, but also a cook preparing supplies. The space under the roof was both a warehouse and a smokehouse. Living under a blanket of smoke took some getting used to, but it made it possible to survive the harshest winters. The smoke trapped heat radiation, preventing it from escaping into the icy sky. It was a kind of greenhouse effect created inside the living space. Without this technology, survival in the north would have been impossible. Did you know that it was the absence of chimneys that allowed up to 80% of the heat to be retained inside the house? The interior of the longhouse was clearly divided into temperature zones for comfort. Wide wooden platforms ran along the long walls on either side of the central hearth. These elevations, called pallia, served as the main living area for the household. The floor at ground level always remained the coldest area, where drafts blew. Raising the living area even half a meter significantly changed the air temperature. People sat, worked during the day, and slept at night on these platforms, staying in a comfortable warm zone. The space under the platforms was used to store tools, firewood, and various household items. This created an additional air layer between the cold ground and the resting place. The wooden flooring itself was warmer than the compacted earth floor. The benches were covered with skins and woven rugs for softness and warmth. The walls behind the seats were often hung with woolen fabrics or woven mats. These tapestries served not only as decoration, but also as powerful insulation, blocking the cold from the logs. A layer of air remained between the fabric and the wall, which acted as a thermos. Wealthy homes could afford multi-layered curtains with embroidery. The poor used simple coarse fabrics or old skins. Sleeping places were often arranged in the form of closed wooden boxes or cabinets directly on the platforms. By climbing into such a box and closing the doors or drawing the curtain, a person created a microclimate. The heat of their own body quickly warmed up the small space and remained there until morning. It resembled a train compartment where everyone had their own private, warm space. People often slept in pairs or threes to keep each other warm. Clothing and bedding played a key role in the system of preserving personal warmth. They used fur blankets, down quilts, and high-quality woolen blankets. Wool has the unique property of keeping you warm even when wet, which was critically important. The Vikings were masters of leatherworking and weaving, creating items of incredible warmth. The bed was the warmest place in the house. Work areas were located closer to the hearth, where there was more light and direct heat from the fire. Women wove and sewed while sitting on the edge of the platform, facing the fire. Men repaired equipment or cut wood, also trying to stay close to the heat. The central passageway remained free for movement, but no one stayed there for long. Life flowed on the raised platforms in warmth and comfort. In the far corners of the house, where it was cooler, storage rooms were set up for food that needed to be kept cold. Grain, dried fish, and barrels of ale were stored where the temperature was lower but not freezing. This natural zoning allowed every square foot of the house to be used to its fullest potential. There was no need to build separate cellars, as the house itself provided different temperature conditions. Smart planning replaced complex storage technologies. If there were partitions inside the house, they were light and did not reach the ceiling so as not to interfere with the draft. Often, the space was divided only by pillars supporting the roof and fabrics hanging from them. This preserved the unity of the air volume and allowed heat to circulate freely. Every corner of the house received its share of heat from the central hearth. Privacy was relative, but warmth was shared. In the evenings, when the whole family gathered on the platforms, the concentration of heat reached its maximum. The multitude of human bodies themselves acted as a powerful heater. In the cramped space of the long house, people warmed each other with their presence and breath. This created a special sense of community, where the survival of each individual depended on everyone else. Heat was a collective resource. Thus, the house was like a layered cake: a cold floor, a warm living area, hot air at the top, and a smoke cap. People found their place in this temperature gradient, intuitively choosing comfort. It was a life in harmony with the physics of heat, without attempts to overcome nature. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of ancient builders right now. The main enemy of heat in the house was not the frosty air, but the moisture coming from the ground. If the foundation and floor got wet, no fire could save the dwelling from freezing and dampness. Water, turning into ice, tore the wood apart and drew out the heat at a tremendous rate. That is why the Vikings paid fanatical attention to drainage and preparing the foundation for their homes. Before construction began, the top layer of fertile soil and turf was completely removed from the site. This soft soil absorbed water like a sponge and was unsuitable for a dry floor. The excavation pit was filled with layers of large stones, gravel, and sand, each layer being carefully compacted. This cushion prevented capillary rise of moisture from the depths of the earth to the floor of the house. The stones created air pockets through which water drained away without lingering. Deep drainage ditches were dug around the house to carry away rainwater and meltwater. These ditches were lined with stones or fascines made of branches to prevent the walls from crumbling. The slope system was designed so that water would flow away from the settlement by gravity. Dry soil around the house served as an excellent heat insulator, while wet soil became a conductor of cold. It was a battle for dryness that could not be lost. The support posts that held up the entire structure were never simply dug into the ground. Their ends were burned over a fire until charred, creating a protective layer that was resistant to rot. Often, a flat stone was placed under the base of the post so that the wood did not touch the ground directly. This prevented moisture from being sucked into the wood and prolonged the life of the supporting structures. The posts remained dry for decades. The floors in the house were often made of adobe. A mixture of clay, sand, and water was compacted to the hardness of stone. A properly made clay floor did not allow moisture to pass through from below and heated up easily. Sometimes straw or wool was added to the mixture for better insulation and strength. Such a floor could be swept and even washed, and it remained smooth and warm. A layer of dry reeds or straw was often laid on top of the clay. In regions with a particularly humid climate, a raised floor system was used. Floor joists were laid on stones above ground level, creating a ventilated subfloor. Air circulated under the floor, drying the boards and preventing condensation from accumulating. Such a house was always much drier and warmer than a building on the ground. This required more wood, but it paid off in comfort. Door thresholds were made unnaturally high to cut off the flow of water and snow from the street. A high threshold also prevented the escape of heavy, cold air that accumulated near the floor. By stepping over it, a person kept the heat inside and left the dirt outside. It was a simple but effective detail of temperature protection. The doors were fitted tightly, but the threshold was the main barrier. The stones used in the foundation of the walls were often laid dry, without mortar, so that water could drain away. The gaps between them were caulked with moss, which did not rot and retained heat. Such a foundation breathed, regulating humidity naturally. The stonework also accumulated cold from the ground, preventing it from reaching the wooden walls. It was a barrier between the world of the living and the icy soil. The slightest mistake in drainage would turn the house into a swamp in the spring. Mold and fungus quickly ate away at the wood, and dampness caused illness in people. Therefore, craftsmen who knew how to read water and build dry houses were valued like gold. Their knowledge was passed down by word of mouth as the greatest treasure. A dry house meant a living house. How important do you think it is today to take groundwater into account when building a private house?
See how the water pools here. Build above the damp earth, or the rot will take hold.
But the ridge higher up, that should be safe.
The correct placement of a building on the terrain was half the battle in the fight against the cold. The Vikings never built houses haphazardly. Every decision was based on observations of nature. They studied the wind rows, the movement of the sun, and the features of the terrain for years before laying the first stone. The house had to be positioned so that winter storms would pass by and the rare sunshine would get inside. Usually, the long side of the house was oriented from east to west. This arrangement allowed for maximum use of solar heat during the short daylight hours. The south wall received the most light, and it was on this wall that they tried to avoid making unnecessary openings in order to retain the accumulated heat. The blank north wall, often additionally insulated with an earthen embankment, faced the coldest winds. This was passive solar architecture 1,000 years before the term was coined. The sun was an ally that was invited into the house. Entrance doors were almost always located on the leeward side or covered by natural barriers. The folds of the terrain, hills, or groups of trees were used as windbreaks. If there was no natural protection, earthen ramparts were built or wicker fences were erected. These barriers slowed down the wind speed even before it reached the dwelling. The calm air zone around the house significantly reduced heat loss. In coastal areas, houses were often built with their ends facing the sea to minimize resistance to the sea breeze. The streamlined shape of the roof and walls worked particularly well here. The buildings seemed to press themselves to the ground, trying not to argue with the power of the ocean winds. The low silhouette made them less vulnerable and warmer. The smaller the area of resistance, the warmer it was inside. Sometimes houses were half buried in the ground, creating semi-dugouts for better insulation. The earth around the walls acted as a thermos, maintaining a stable temperature all year round. Such houses were warm in winter and cool in summer, but required excellent waterproofing. Digging into the ground was an ancient and reliable way to shelter from the cold. From the outside, such a house looked like a low hill. The entrances were often equipped with long corridors, vestibules that dampened gusts of wind. A person had to pass through several doors or curtains before reaching the living area. Cold air got stuck in these labyrinths, losing its strength and temperature. This airlock system worked flawlessly, retaining heat even with frequent traffic. The door never opened directly into the living room. The location of the windows, or rather the skylights, also depended on the orientation to the cardinal points. They were made on the roof or high on the pediments to catch the light, but not let the heat escape. There were no glass windows at that time. Instead, ox bladders or thin leather that allowed dim light to pass through were used. These membranes were multi-layered, creating an air gap for insulation. The light was dim, but warmth was more important. Neighbors often built their houses close to each other, creating a common wind shadow. Streets were planned so as not to turn into wind tunnels. The seemingly chaotic development was actually a well-thought-out microclimate system. People huddled together in their houses like sheep in a flock in bad weather. Collective protection was more effective than individual protection. Observing nature provided clues. Where the snow melts faster, the ground is warmer. Where trees bend to the ground, the wind is strongest. The Vikings knew how to read these signs and used them when choosing a place to settle. They did not conquer the landscape, but rather integrated their dwellings into it. Harmony with the place was the key to survival. A mistake in the orientation of the house meant condemning the family to a constant struggle with the cold and the consumption of huge amounts of firewood. A correctly positioned house heated itself, helping its inhabitants. It was the art of living in harmony with the cardinal points. The walls of Viking houses were not just fences, but complex multi-layered structures. Depending on the availability of materials, different technologies were used, but the goal was the same: maximum insulation. In wooded areas, they built with vertically placed logs, the so-called post and beam construction. The logs were split in half and placed with the flat side facing inwards, tightly fitted together. Thick wood itself is excellent at retaining heat. The gaps between the logs were the main source of heat loss, so they were carefully caulked. Moss, wool, and hemp, soaked in resin or tar, were used. This sealant was hammered into the joints with great force, making the wall virtually monolithic. Moss was the ideal material. It did not rot, had antiseptic properties, and expanded when wet, closing the gaps even more tightly. The walls became impervious to wind. In regions where there were few forests, such as Iceland, walls were made of stone and peat. 2 stone walls were built, an outer and an inner one, and the space between them was filled with earth and gravel. The thickness of such a wall could reach 1.5 to 2 meters. It was incredibly powerful insulation, comparable to modern energy-efficient houses. The stone protected from the wind, and the earth inside kept the heat in. They often used the wattle and daub technique, creating walls from woven branches coated with clay. The clay was mixed with straw, manure, and wool for strength and insulation. Such walls were made double, with an air gap or filled with dry moss inside. It was a lightweight but very warm structure that was easy to repair. Cracks were simply filled with fresh clay in the spring. The interior walls were often covered with wooden panels, creating another barrier against the cold. Air remained between the panels and the main wall, which is the best insulator. Wealthy homes decorated these panels with carvings, turning insulation into art. Wood is always warm to the touch, which created comfort when touched. Cold stone or earth remained outside. Outside, the walls could be additionally covered with turf almost to the roof. The house looked like a green hill with only the wooden top sticking out. Such an earth cover completely protected against freezing and wind. In winter, it was covered with snow, and the house was in a deep, warm burrow. It was the perfect solution for open, windy spaces. The quality of the wood was also important. Resinous species that were resistant to moisture were chosen. The logs were prepared for years, drying them in the shade so that they would not crack. The craftsmen knew which side of the log to place facing the street and which side to place facing the interior, taking into account the density of the annual rings. The northern side of the tree is denser, so it was turned outward. Each log knew its place. The walls required constant care and attention from the owners. Every autumn, they checked the caulking, renewed the plaster, and repaired the cladding. It was a ritual of preparation for winter, on which life depended. The house was a living organism that required care in exchange for warmth. A lazy owner would freeze in winter. Interestingly, this wall construction allowed the house to breathe. Moisture from the room gradually escaped through the micropores of the materials, without accumulating inside in the form of condensation. The house was not stuffy. The air was always refreshed, but the heat was retained. It was a natural recuperator created from simple materials. The balance of humidity and heat was ideal. Modern builders often study these ancient techniques in an attempt to replicate their effectiveness. Viking walls have proven their reliability through 1,000 years of survival.
This is exactly what we mean by sustainable design.
Centuries later, and the structure is still sound.
The thermal mass on these walls is remarkable.
Ugh. Imagine the energy savings. They really mastered sustainable design.
The houses of that era were perpetually dim, which would seem oppressive to us. But for the Vikings, the lack of large windows was a conscious necessity and a way to conserve heat. A window is a hole in the thermal armor of a house through which precious energy escapes. Therefore, the light openings were made small, narrow, and placed high under the roof. They were more like ventilation hatches than windows for viewing. Glass as we know it did not exist at that time. It was a rare luxury. The openings were covered with specially treated thin leather, ox bladders, or oiled cloth. These translucent membranes allowed dim, diffused light to pass through, but kept out the wind. Thinly sawn horn or mica plates fastened with lead were often used. Such material was opaque, but durable and relatively warm. Light in the house was valued, but warmth was valued much more than any lighting. In winter, when daylight lasted only a few hours, windows were still useless. Life centered around the hearth fire and oil lamps. The dim light created a feeling of comfort, security, and intimacy. The world outside was hostile and cold, while inside it was dark but warm. To keep the heat in at night, all the windows were covered with thick wooden shutters. The shutters were lined with felt or skins for better insulation. This was as essential as locking the doors. Closing the house tightly meant keeping the heat accumulated during the day until morning. In the morning, the shutters were opened, letting in the dim grey light. The lack of bright light affected people's daily lives and crafts. They tried to do delicate work that required sharp eyesight during the short hours of daylight, with the doors open or in the summer. In winter, they did what could be done by touch or by the light of a fire. Spinning, mending nets. People's eyes were accustomed to twilight and could distinguish details even in low light. Darkness was a natural state of winter. In summer, when the sun did not set at all, small windows helped to create darkness for sleep. During the white nights, a pleasant twilight remained inside the house, allowing for rest. Thus, the architecture worked in both winter and summer, regulating not only heat, but also light. The house protected against the extremes of the climate. Sometimes special skylights were made in the roof, raised sections of the roof with openings on the sides. They provided more light than simple holes and better protection from precipitation. Light fell from above, illuminating the center of the hall and the hearth. This created a beautiful effect of a pillar of light in the smoky air. The architecture of light was primitive but expressive. When opened during the day, the entrance doors became the main source of light. The stream of light rushing into the dark room sharply outlined the figures of people and objects. This contrast between light and darkness was part of the aesthetics of that world. Leaving the house, people squinted from the brightness of the snow. Entering, they were blinded by the darkness. The darkness hid the dirt and soot that were inevitable in a house with an open hearth. The walls, covered with soot, did not seem dirty in the semi-darkness. The cramped quarters and proximity of people to each other were not so noticeable in the dark. Darkness expanded the space psychologically. Thus, the rejection of large windows was the price paid for warmth and survival. The Vikings chose a life in twilight, but in warmth, instead of a bright but icy grave. Their homes were dark cocoons that preserved life until the arrival of spring. No house, no matter how warm, could withstand the Arctic winter alone. The Vikings understood the power of community and built their settlements as unified defense systems against the cold. A village or farmstead, tun, was planned so that the buildings protected each other. Farm buildings, warehouses, and workshops were located around the perimeter, creating a buffer zone for residential buildings. The wind first hit the uninhabited walls, losing its force. Fences and hedges acted as snow fences and windbreaks. They were placed so that snowdrifts did not block the entrances, but, on the contrary, provided additional insulation for the blank walls. The space between the houses was not blown through, creating its own, milder microclimate. The snow in the yards was trampled down, creating convenient and protected paths. Life inside the settlement was more comfortable than in the open field. Often, several families would pool their resources to build one large, long house. Living in a large community was warmer and more economical than heating many small huts. One large hearth consumed less wood than 10 small ones for the same number of people. Collective survival was the basis of the social structure. A lone individual was doomed to freeze. In the center of the settlement, there was often an open space for gatherings, protected on all sides by houses. Here, the wind was calmer, and it was possible to stay outside even in bad weather. Children played under supervision, and adults worked in the fresh air. It was the warm square of the village. Bathhouses and smithies, as the most fire hazardous and hot objects, were placed separately, but wisely. The heat from the smithy could be used to dry grain or wood in an outbuilding. The bathhouse was a place of extreme heat, where people warmed themselves to the bone, driving the cold out of their bodies. It was an important part of hygiene and thermoregulation. Garbage piles and manure were also used in the heating system, placing them on the leeward side. Decay processes release heat, and although it doesn't sound very pleasant, it worked as a heat shield. The pragmatism of the Vikings knew no bounds when it came to conserving energy. Everything was put to use for the sake of survival. Social ties were as strong as the walls of the houses. If someone ran out of firewood or had a fire, neighbors came to the rescue immediately. Warmth was a common value that was protected by the whole community. Expulsion from the community in winter was equivalent to a death sentence. A person outside the warm circle would perish. Seasonal work was planned so as to minimize going outside in winter. Everything necessary for life was brought inside the perimeter of the settlement in autumn. In winter, the village froze, turning into a sleeping organism under the snow, inside which life glowed. It was a strategy of hibernation, adopted from bears. In spring, when the sun began to warm, the settlement came to life, opening up to the world. But the experience of surviving the winter brought people together and forced them to prepare for the next one. The cycle of life revolved around preserving heat. The architecture of Viking settlements is an example of a society's ideal adaptation to an extreme environment. They did not fight nature alone, but met its challenges with a united front. Their villages were fortresses where the enemy was not man, but the cold. We have seen that protection from the cold in the Viking Age was not the result of a single successful idea, but a whole philosophy of life. Curved walls, living roofs, smoke corridors, and wise zoning are all part of a single survival mechanism. Ancient craftsmen did not have engineering degrees, but their solutions were tested by the harshest examiner, 1,000 years of cold. They proved that the human mind is capable of creating comfort even where nature itself is against it. Their homes were arks of warmth in an ocean of ice and snow. Which of the ancient builders' technologies do you find most ingenious? Would you like to see a video about how the Vikings built their legendary ships? Suggest topics in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the past.